Welcome everybody. One of the basic beliefs of our fellowship is what we call a historic interpretation of Bible prophecy, meaning in simple terms, the prophecies in the Bible, put your history book down alongside the Bible and see whether, not whether, it always is, fulfilled and how it's fulfilled. So that's a little bit of what we're doing here today. We often talk about the tribe of Judah and the destruction by the Babylonians in 586 BC, and a lot to do with that. And we quote books like Jeremiah, Ezekiel and Daniel, who are all contemporaries, alive at the same time, all to do with that destruction which happened around 600 BC. We're going back 140 years to around 745 BC, and we're dealing with the 10-tribed house today, mainly concentrating on that, which we don't often do. They're not lost. They've been always referred to as the lost 10 tribes of Israel. I'm saying we found them. So, original promise to Abraham, just dwelling on that for a second, and thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad. And this is what actually the way it happened. To the west, which was Scandinavia, British Isles, northwest from Palestine, to the east into India, Near East, Far East, to the north, Canada, USA, and then to the south, New Zealand, South Africa, and Australia. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. The British Commonwealth, a lot of people point out, is this to do with the goodness of the people or the badness? No, it's got nothing to do with that. There were good kings and bad kings in the Bible. There were good people and bad people. It doesn't really come in. It's more what this guy did, and the promises to him, and then his son Isaac, and then the next one Jacob and the 12 tribes. Okay, we know about the 2 tribes, in other words the Jews. What about the lost 10 tribes? What happened to them? That's what we want to look at today. Just one map you can find on Google Zoom, not exactly what I'm talking about today. All I want to show you is that when they show migrations across Europe, guess what? They always come from the east to the west. As you can see on that particular one, they're going right back 39,000, is it? BC, going back a long way. But what they do is they bring the people from there to there. So what we're doing is nothing different to that, maybe just a little more accurate than that, instead of a guess. So we're talking about Bible prophecy. Isaiah 42 verse 8. I am the Lord, that is my name, and my glory I will not give to another, neither my praise to graven images. Behold, the former things have come to pass, and new things do I declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. So that's what we're doing with Bible prophecy. It's good fun. Thank you, that's better. Some of the great prophecies of Daniel there as an example. So we're talking particularly about the Assyrian Empire this time, not the Babylonian Empire. That was the next one. So the one before the Babylonian Empire was the Assyrian Empire, which went for a long time when you look at that, around 300 years as an empire, the main empire. They went from 911 to 609 BC. Other than Helen, who can tell me how long the Babylonian Empire lasted? Helen's excluded. Anybody know how long that lasted? It went from 609, the end of the Assyrian Empire, to 539, when Belshazzar got murdered. Only went 70 years. So you can see 300's a long time. So we're going to talk about these 3 kings, these Assyrian kings, who one by one got rid of the 10 tribes. We'll put it as simple as that. Tiglath-Pileser the 3rd, Shalmaneser the 5th, Sargon the 2nd. Sennacherib, we won't talk about him much today, because he came down against Jerusalem, against Hezekiah, and found out he couldn't do what he thought he could do. But we're talking about the 3 kings before him. So, Tiglath-Pileser, what an interesting name. In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, who was not a very nice guy, that guy, came that guy, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and took those towns. I won't try and say them. The ones that I'm interested in, particularly as far as we're concerned, is Gilead, Galilee, and we're going to see that that is the tribe of Manasseh, and all the land of Naphtali, another tribe, and carried away captive to Assyria. So that was in 745 BC. Now and again you'll see a picture I've got there of the Assyrians. When you go to the British Museum, who's been to the British Museum? A few people. Far more display of the Assyrian Empire than any other kingdom. huge sections of what they got out of Nineveh, showing them a great warrior-like people. They were really dreadful people too. They skinned people alive and all sorts of things. So going back to that there, as you see, it mentions Gilead, Galilee, Naphtali, and then you see on the one on the right, see where Galilee is? Up on the west side of the Sea of Galilee, down a little bit on the other side of the River Jordan, you've got Gilead. Now you go across here, you can see that Gilead and Galilee are where Manasseh was, and you can see where Naphtali is up above the other one that's mentioned. So that northern part was taken away in 745 BC. That's an important date later on. So Shalmaneser, the fifth, after Tiglath, is known to have campaigned extensively in the lands west of the Assyrian heartland, warring not only against Israelites. I won't read it all. It's just saying that that's what he did, but it picks on what he did to the Israelites. Again, looking at the pictures on the right, a guy physically killing a lion and so on. So, the last king of the 10 tribes is a guy called Hoshea. He reigned 9 years from 730 to 721 BC. In the 12th year, 730 BC of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea, the son of Elah, to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was evil. All of the northern kings, not one good one amongst them, in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. He was bad, but maybe not really bad. It's the only thing I can think of there. Against him came Shalmaneser, so that was the next king down, and Hoshea became his servant and gave him presents. So the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, this same king, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria, Shalmaneser, shut him up and bound him in prison, locked up the city. That's what it really means in Samaria. And the king of Israel came up throughout all the land and went to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. But actually he didn't quite complete it. And the next king down, Sargon II, was only on the throne for a year or so, and that's when he finished it off. Now the only mention in the Bible of Sargon is in Isaiah 20 verse 1. Nothing to do with what I'm talking about, just the name is in the Bible. By the way, if you might remember, in Ashdod was where they put the Ark of the Covenant, and the fish god fell down. So that's Ashdod, which is mentioned here. So, talking about Sargon, Wikipedia, ascended to the throne, he quickly abolished the tax and mainly when I jump down to the end, Samaria was swiftly conquered, and through its conquest the kingdom of Israel fell. So it was actually under that third Assyrian king that all the northern tribes were taken away captive into Assyria. So he resided in that palace. Sargon's predecessor, we've talked about him, had tried to continue the expansion. He did not succeed, of his father Tiglath. Down the bottom, notably his prolonged siege of Samaria, which lasted 3 years, might still have been ongoing by the time of his death, which it was. And Sargon finished it off. So what does the Bible say about that time in the book of Kings? The 9th year of Hoshea, he reigned for 9 years, the last king of the 10 tribes, the king of Assyria, we now know that it was Sargon, took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria. So this is the main point we're making today about the 10 tribes, is that they were taken away bit by bit in 2 big lumps, one up north and the rest down south. And then the next king, Sennacherib, tried to take Judah, Jerusalem. He did not succeed. It's funny how he compared what happened to these kings and the 3 previous Assyrian kings, and he mocked Hezekiah, saying, well, why are you different? They thought, but there was a big difference. They were all evil and he was good. That was the difference, and God protected Hezekiah and the house of Judah at that time. Carried away Israel into Assyria and placed them in these different places, in the cities of the Medes, for so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord. So that's exactly what happened. Horrible pictures. You find these all in the British Museum. One there of somebody being strangled. They like to put all the gory details up. I think it's the same scriptures, just different pictures. I'd already made this up. I thought I'd leave that there. Picture of Uzziah and them going into captivity. That's the big thing there. Sargon II again, according to Sargon's inscription, 27,290 Israelites were deported from Israel and resettled across Assyria, followed the standard of the Assyrian way of dealing with defeated enemies, always moved other people in. They became known as Samaritans, as we know later on. The specific resettlement resulted in the famous loss, this is from Wikipedia, the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Well, we're just saying maybe we found them. So, question, what did the Assyrians conquer in 721 BC? This is Wikipedia. The answer, in that year, Assyrian army captured the Israelite capital Samaria and carried them away, the citizens of the northern kingdom. And so it goes on. So we're just establishing that point. So what did Josephus have to say around 70 AD? He was actually in the city of Jerusalem when it was besieged by the Romans. And he made this comment all those years later. The 10 tribes are beyond Euphrates till now. So it's from 700 odd BC, so 800 years later, and are an immense multitude and not to be estimated number. So those 10 tribes were moved right up in northern Assyria. Jumping to the book of Amos now. Now Amos, he did his prophecies in the reign of a king called Uzziah. This is Judah king, Uzziah. I'll just read down a little bit further. In the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. Now we can pinpoint the earthquake from history. So it was 2 years before the earthquake in 760 BC. So he started prophesying at that time, the last few years of the reign of Uzziah. And he said, the Lord will roar from Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the inhabitants of the shepherds shall mourn, and the top of Carmel shall wither. By the way, Carmel, see where I got the little red arrow there? That's where Carmel is. So it was part of the tribe of Manasseh at that particular time. But by the way, he's prophesying in Jerusalem about what's happening up north. And he's prophesying in 757 BC. Amos again. He said, Amos, what seest thou? And he said, a basket of summer fruit. Then said the Lord unto me, the end is come upon my people Israel. I will not again pass by them any more. Thinking about that, what does that mean? A basket of summer fruit. And I thought of this scripture here. The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. And that's really how it was with Israel. The Lord had tried to help them again and again and again. A basket of summer fruit would not last very long, as I thought. You know, within a few days it'd be the end of it if you hadn't eaten it. And he's just saying, just like that basket's going to wither and pass away, so are you. Now he was just a herdman, was Amos. A lot of the guys in the Bible were educated and so on, but he was just a herdman. Not that anything wrong with being a herdman, but he wasn't a scholar. But a famous verse in Amos 9 verse 9 says, for lo, just remembering when he's prophesying, at the time of King Uzziah, I'm going to talk about him in a minute, I will command and will sift the house of Israel among all nations like as corn. Now the Bible's got the word corn, but it's actually talking about wheat. It's sifted in a sieve. Yet shall not the least grain fall upon the earth. So Amos had some great prophecies. He maybe did his prophecy all in one go, around 757 BC, although I've got 762, around that era. So then he talks about their captivity. Thy land shall be divided by line. First of all, we see 10 tribes, some of the tribes up north taken in 745 BC by Tiglath-Pileser, and then right at the end with Sargon, they went about 30 years later. That'll do. Israel shall surely go into captivity, forth of his land. Verse 4, and though they go into captivity before their enemies, thence will I command the sword, and it shall slay them. So it's not going to be a peaceful time for their migration or their captivity. I'll set my eyes upon them, and not for good. Great book, isn't it? It's a fantastic prophecy. He prophesied over 4 Judean kings. Uzziah, the one that was at the time of Amos, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. So quite a big span, if you took the whole span from 809 to 696 BC, over 100 years. He started prophesying in 760, 3 years before Uzziah died. In the year King Uzziah died, which is 757 BC, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. And really stop to think about the book of Isaiah. You sort of picture him as writing it all down in one go. There's big gaps between these different kings that he prophesied under. He maybe only prophesied for 3 years under the end of the reign of Uzziah. Chapter 6, a great chapter where the Lord said, who will go for me? He said, I will. And he did that in 757 BC. 12 years before Syria captured Manasseh in 745 BC, and 36 years before the captivity of Ephraim in 721 BC. So that is the coverage of Uzziah. He's right there. The number one enemy on the planet at the time was Assyria, not Babylon. That was another 100 years away. So the prophecy of Uzziah and Hosea prophesied at the same time. That was to do with Assyria. Not that they stopped and didn't mention Babylon. I just thought, nothing to do with what I'm talking about today, a little bit about Uzziah, which I never stopped to think about. When we talk about good kings of Judah, we talk about Hezekiah, Josiah, and Jehoshaphat, well-known good kings. Uzziah, in a sense, I thought, how sad. He reigned for 52 years and he only ever made one mistake. So we sort of remember the mistake that he made. He must have been, for many years, a very good king. Then all the people of Judah took Uzziah when he was 16 years old and made him king. And then he reigned for 52 years over Judah. Jump down to verse 16. But when he was strong, his heart was lifted up to his destruction, transgressed against the Lord his God, and went into the temple of the Lord to burn incense upon the altar of incense. So the wickedness of this guy, did he murder somebody like maybe King David did? Did he commit adultery? What he did is he got a bit proud, and it wasn't sort of like an evil thing he did. He wanted to offer incense to the Lord, except that it was only the priesthood that could do that. Only the priesthood could offer. So that was his one mistake. He got a bit ahead of himself, and he suffered as a result as a leper for the rest of his life. And Uzziah was a leper until the day of his death at 757 BC, and dwelt in a separate house to live separately, being a leper, for he was cut off from the house of the Lord. The book of Isaiah, you can see it was the same 4 kings, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz and Hezekiah. And one of his prophecies there in chapter 14, O Israel, return unto the Lord thy God, for thou hast fallen by thine iniquity. Take with you words and turn to the Lord. Say to him, take away all iniquity and receive us graciously. Asher, so that was the kingdom at the time, shall not save us. So at times they turn to these kingdoms to help them, but the Lord is saying, no, that is not the answer. Jump back to nail down Manasseh and Ephraim, because that's mainly who we're talking about. His father refused and said, I noticed when he blessed the son, he crossed his hands, and he blessed Ephraim the younger against Manasseh. Also shall become a people. We connect that to America. He also shall be great, well, the greatest country on the earth today, most powerful. But truly his younger brother Ephraim shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations, which we connect to Britain and the Commonwealth. Really, there's no other country on earth that comes within cooey of matching that. Ephraim and the tribes of Israel, his fellows. Now, what happened later on is that Ephraim came to represent a whole 10 tribes. Didn't mention them all. Talk about Ephraim in the book of Hosea, you are talking about the 10 tribes. Later on, of course, we know Judah, out of Judah and Benjamin, became to represent the other 2 tribes. So Ephraim, the 10 tribes, Judah, the 2 tribes. Ephraim is smitten, their root is dried up. They shall bear no fruit, yea, though they bring forth, yet will I slay even the beloved fruit of the womb. So because of their sin, my God will cast them away, because they did not hearken unto him, and they shall be wanderers among the nations. So this is the eventual prophecy of these 10 tribes, taken away captive by Assyria, for a while remaining in parts of the Assyrian Empire. And one day we want to think about what happened in 609 BC when they were no longer an empire, when Babylon became the powerful country. They were no longer under the restrictions of the Assyrian Empire. They could go where they liked. I'm sure Babylon at the time was far busy with all the other things they're doing, and these people started to wander northwest. So what was one of the problems? Very similar to what we read of in the book of Revelation. I am rich and increased with goods and have need of nothing. Isaiah dealing with the same time, the same people. Ephraim feedeth upon a wind. and followeth after an east wind. An east wind goes from east to west. Bible way of saying these people now are going from the east, Middle East, going to go west, eventually through Europe to Britain. He daily increaseth lies and desolations, and they do make a covenant with the Assyrians, and oil is carried into Egypt. And Ephraim said, Yet I am become rich. Sounds like the book of Revelation, doesn't it? I have found me all substance, and in all my labours they shall find none iniquity in me that were sin. The next verse, And I am the Lord thy God, from the land of Egypt will yet make thee to dwell in tabernacle. In other words, you're going to be moving away. You're going to live in tents, is another way of putting it, as in the days of the solemn Feast of Tabernacles. You're going to no longer be living in Israel. You're going to be travelling and living in tents, is basically what it's saying. Back to the book of Kings. And they left all the commandments of the Lord their God and made them molten images. Talk about the 10 tribes, even 2 calves. We've got plenty of reference to that. Made a grove and worshipped all the hosts of heaven, and they served Baal. In verse 17, and they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire, and used divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with the 10 tribes, another way of putting that, and he removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah. That really nails down the difference between the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes at that time. So Uzziah again, who prophesied at the same time as those 4 kings, for the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, and within 65 years shall Ephraim be broken. So he prophesied 35 years ahead. So that was when he prophesied in 757 BC. Take off the 35 years, 721, and that's exactly when it was all over. And the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is Pekah. If you will not believe, surely you shall not be established. Samaria besieged 3 years by Manasseh, and then later on Sargon finished it off. So, end of the Assyrian Empire, 609 BC. Nabopolassar, who was Nebuchadnezzar's dad, he finally defeated the last of the Assyrians in 609 BC. When the Assyrian capital Nineveh was overrun by the Medes, Scythians, we mentioned them a little bit later, Babylonians and their allies in 612, the Assyrians moved their capital to Haran. Haran, of course, is where Abraham moved down to Israel. You read other mentions of Haran. When Haran was captured by the alliance in 609 BC, ending the Assyrian Empire. So that's where they moved the children of Israel into that area there. Israelite settlements, but they didn't stay there. They followed an east wind, as the Bible says. Different parts there would indicate the Hebrew mountains. We don't know that for sure. And they moved up through there and then across Europe. Waymark, interesting testimony here. We particularly look at the tribe of Dan. Is Ephraim my dear son? Is he a pleasant child? For since I spake against him, I do earnestly remember him still. Therefore my bowels are troubled for him. I will surely have mercy upon him, saith the Lord. And then verse 21, interesting verse is, set thee up waymarks. Now that word, if you look it up in the concordance, means signposts. Make thee high. Look that up, it means signposts. Heaps. Look that up, it means signposts. But that's how they translate it. But each time it actually is the word for signposts. Set thine heart towards the highway. They're going from an east to the west or northwest, even the way which thou wentest. Turn again, O Virgin of Israel, turn again to these thy cities. One, it's a big story and it's very hard to nail it completely down. But the thought is that as these people migrated, and we know they did, across Europe, eventually into Scandinavia, and then later into the British Isles, that they left signposts, waymarks, as they went. They followed the rivers, by the way. They didn't go over mountains. As these people migrated over maybe hundreds of years across to that area, they mainly followed the valleys and the rivers. And that's probably why they left those things there. So, a bit of a diagram, a British Israel diagram. I'll take the children of Israel from among the heathen and will gather them on every side and bring them into their own land. So from Media, Syria, we saw where they were taken, the 10 tribes, then across eventually, came in under all these other people, and the Danes and the Angles and so on. We'll talk about that in a minute. And we already read that verse down on the bottom left-hand corner. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only. So laid down the bottom, you've got Judah going into Babylon and back for the time of Christ, but the 10 tribes going north and never coming back. So going into a little bit of British history, appears as though the thought is very vague. I got 700 to 600 there. You can't nail it down completely. It looks like the Celts came into Britain around that time BC. Remember, the Assyrian Empire ended in 609 BC, so it's saying eventually some of the people actually already got there by then, but then they kept coming. Roman invasion, let's talk about Britain now, is the period in classical antiquity when large parts of the island of Great Britain were occupied by the Roman Empire. Because they didn't get beyond Hadrian's Wall, right up the top, the canny Scots stopped them. The occupation lasted from 43 AD to 410 AD. Now, I'm sure you don't say it this way. I've heard it's pronounced totally different, but I like Boadicea. It's easier to say. Was queen of the British, that particular tribe, who led an uprising against the conquering forces of the Roman Empire. Unfortunately, she got crushed and got executed. And that, by the way, if you've been to London, right near the River Thames, this incredible statue of Boadicea with a chariot taking on the Romans, but unfortunately was unable to stop them. So, Constantine, known as Constantine III, withdrew virtually the whole Roman army from Britain. And from France, I got a little guy down there called Asterix. If you know the cartoon Asterix, that's at the time of the Roman occupation of France, not Britain. And it's that particular time we're talking about. Britain around 409 BC, both to fend off the barbarians who had recently entered the Roman, again from the east to the west, the Huns and all these other people that came down, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths and the many other Goths, to fight for control of the western half of the empire. So then, just briefly, people coming in, the Angles, the Jutes, the Saxons and the Frisians, straight after the Romans left, all these other people started coming in from northern Germany and all that region, Scandinavia, Ireland, Denmark and so on. Another picture showing that. The Angles, same people. Wikipedia says when the Angles, Saxons, Jutes and Frisians invaded Britain during the 5th and 6th century AD, the area after the Romans had left, they conquered slowly and became known as England, from Angle land. Before this, you cannot accurately use the word England. It wasn't until the Angles came in. The Vikings first invaded Britain a bit later in 793 and last invaded in 1066, and really does point out in this particular thought that William the Conqueror was a Viking. He was not French. He might have lived in France, in Normandy in France, but he was actually a Viking. Became King of England after the Battle of Hastings. Now, this guy Rollo is the great-great-great-grandfather of William the Conqueror, was a Viking who became the first ruler of Normandy. He emerged as the outstanding warrior among Norsemen, to get the word Normandy from Norsemen, who had secured a permanent foothold in France, as we'd say today, in the valley of the Lower Seine. After the Seine siege of Chartres, Helen says, Chartres. She knows a bit of French, I don't know. That's how you say that. In 911, Charles the Simple, another one calls him Charles the Fat. So he was both fat and simple. The king of West France will say, gifted them lands between the mouth. It goes on describing the area, Normandy, in exchange for Rollo agreeing to end his brigandage, his own war fighting against them, swearing allegiance to him, that he has to bend down and kiss his foot, had to be converted to Christianity, Roman Catholicism, and pledged to defend the Seine estuary from other Vikings. So a fairly famous guy, old Rollo. I thought I'd put a picture of what happened when he did kiss the king's foot. One of his men grabbed the foot of the King of France, he lifted it up, so the king fell on his back, and at mouth height, he then kissed his foot. So he got his own there. And by the way, they took over a lot bigger area than was granted. Another famous king around that time, of course, was Canute, who was a Danish king, and the famous story of him proving that he wasn't almighty, sitting at the edge of the sea and trying to stop the tide coming in, just saying, I'm immortal. A couple of interesting antics there. So right up the top you see the Earl of Moore, have you say, and below him Rollo. He was called Rollo the Walker, and I looked at why was he called Rollo the Walker. I reckon he was such a big guy that a horse couldn't carry him. He had to walk. I don't know how true that is. He was a very big and powerful Viking. He came right down through the line, down second line up, you got William the Conqueror. So he was a Viking. And it was the last, we think, of all the tribes coming in, the Battle of Hastings, the most famous date in British history in the country of Britain today, known by more than any other date, 1066. On a book that we've got at home, the effect of the Norman conquest was to drive the Anglo-Saxon language underground, to make it a tongue only spoken by the ruler, by the simple and poor. Anglo-Saxon, in the mouth of such men, lost its Germanic inflections and general heaviness. And when, as happened astonishingly quickly, it's a great statement out of this book, Normans and Anglo-Saxons found that they were one people. And that was really basically what happened. All these people that came in, Romans seemed to come and go. I've never run into anybody in England and said, I'm a descendant of the Romans. Whether there are, I'm not sure. Maybe there must be some, surely. But it looks like mainly they had no great impact on England after they left. In 410 AD, they were gone. Then all these other people came and they stayed. Prophecy here, just one king. And say unto them, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will take of the children of Israel from among the heathen, whither they be gone, and I will gather them on every side and bring them into their own land, and I'll make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel. And one king, well, we know who that is, one king shall be king over them, and they shall no more be two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all. So, Bible prophesies. Nobody seems to dispute where the Jews are, or that they were the descendants of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. People just accept that. For some reason, the 10 tribes are not supposed to have lasted. But this says that somewhere on planet Earth today are the 10 tribes, and one day they're going to be reunited with the other 2 tribes and become one nation again. But when is that? It's when the Lord comes back. Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, and they shall dwell in a place of their own, and move no more, neither shall the children of wickedness afflict them any more, as before. So since 1066 onwards, for 900 odd years, that's basically the story. We think of the French Armada that tried to come, later on the Spanish Armada that tried to come. We think of the 2 great world wars, and go on and on and on. This little bit of dirt off the coast of Europe, not a very nice way to describe it, these beautiful isles off the coast of Europe have been a main liberator of that region, and they themselves have not been conquered since that time. This was an interesting program. Some people have heard of Sam Willis. He's a historian, scientist type guy, does a lot of things on the history of Britain. One day we were watching this and Helen said, I'm going to photograph that, where they dug up this chariot, which is a Middle East type chariot. And then they did a DNA test, and he comments on that and said that the DNA comes from Scythia, north of Palestine, where Assyrians were. They've got the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, and they immigrated east to west. The DNA, 70% of British DNA means they came from that region. I remember many, many years ago, people that were anti this thought said, oh, one day DNA will disprove that doctrine. It's done the opposite. It's actually proved it, which is amazing. And that's what he showed, the DNA coming into England from the Middle East on the History Channel arrives in Britain. Also the domestic animals. Don't stop to think of that. Horses and chooks and cows and sheep. How did they get into Britain? Appears though everything indicates that they came from the Middle East. Well, we know they were there, described as clean and unclean animals, way back, the time of Moses. All those animals were there. How did they get into Britain? It's an interesting thought. This is an article that Helen wrote. We can remember saying the DNA, we just went through that, all people. They said in this program that all the people who came to Britain came from the Middle East, and they all had the same DNA. Down a bit further, Sam Willis said, the animals that they brought with them came from the Middle East. Cows, sheep, pigs, goats, hens, he said. 70% of the British people today have the same DNA, and it came from the Middle East. Wow. We don't need that, by the way, but it's nice having it. Jeremiah, hear the word of the Lord, O you nations, and declare it in the isles afar off. Now, When you look at the world around where that was it Crete or Malta? No, he wasn't. He's talking about the isles afar off, the very famous British Isles. He that scattered Israel will gather him and keep him as a shepherd doth his flock. Again, the isles afar off. Listen, O isles, unto me, and hearken ye people from afar. The Lord hath called me from the womb, from the bowels of my mother hath he made mention of my name. And he hath made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand hath he hid me, and made me a polished shaft. In his quiver hath he hid me. And he said unto me, Thou art my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Even the Declaration of Brave, the Scottish people, wrote this declaration to Pope, or Catholic at the time, Pope John the 22nd. I'll read it. Most Holy Father and Lord, I don't like reading that about a Pope. We know, and from the chronicles and books of the ancients, we find that among other famous nations, our own, the Scots, has been graced with widespread renown. They journeyed from Greater Scythia by the way of the Tyrrhenian Sea, which is right next to Italy, and the Pillars of Hercules, Gibraltar, and dwelt for a long course of time in Spain among the most savage tribes, but nowhere could they be subdued by any race, however barbarous. Thence they came, and they give the time 1,200 years after the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea. We know that's 1495 BC, minus 1,200, around 300 BC. It's rough. I mean, he's not got an exact date there. So they came in way back before BC onwards. Their home in the west where they still live today. So there's Scythia. Going back. Journeyed from Greater Scythia by the way of that. From the Middle East, where the children of Israel were taken under the Assyrian Empire. And then they went from there. That's what they say. 700 years ago. So, you know that in the 7-time punishment chapter of Leviticus, it mentions it 4 times, and it appears now there are 4 fulfillments of those 7 times punishment. The first one, 1455 BC, which was the Battle of Jericho, to 1066, the Battle of Hastings, same period of time, the whole 12 tribes finally come into Britain. 745 BC, when Manasseh and Naphtali and the other were taken captive. At that time, we come to 1776. We believe Manasseh connects to America. Here we have all the massive 13s, 13 arrows, 13 star, 13 constellation, 13 olive branches, 13 olives, and so it can go on. America represented by the number 13, we know, and in a sense they became the 13th tribe when Jacob crossed his hands. One of the fulfillments of that 7 times punishment. Another one, 721, which we've gone through today, you come to 1800. Far more famous and well known is 1801 when the Union Jack came into being, but actually it was the year before, which would link in with this prophecy. They had the Act of Union between England and Ireland. And on the 1st of January 1801, they developed the Union Jack. And then last of all, one we're not talking so much about today, which we often do talk a lot about, was the House of Judah in 604 to 1917 AD. Prophecy again in Amos, and I will bring again the captivity of my people Israel, and they shall build the waste cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink the wine thereof. They shall also make gardens and eat the fruit of them. Same prophecy here. Say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel his fellows. So as you see in this, Ephraim, being the right of inheritance from his father Joseph, represents the whole 10 tribes. The tribes of Israel his fellows, and will put them with him, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in my hand. So Judah representing the 2 tribes, Ephraim representing the 10 tribes, and itself, going to put them together and make great prophecy that hasn't happened yet. The sticks whereof thou writest shall be in thine hand before thine eyes. My final statement. Nobody lost. Everybody found. The kingdom of God shall rule supreme. And all the people said, Amen. Thank you.